Well, thank you. I just have one more announcement that didn't tell Matthew about. That is, please go and vote if you haven't yet. We just talked to our son and our granddaughter. Neither of them have voted yet, so we yelled at both of them. So please go vote. All right, we're really happy to have as our speaker this month the Kevin Bolling, who is the executive director of the Secular Student Alliance. He's been a director since 2017, but he's been involved in nonprofit leadership for the last 20 years. For 10 years, he was the executive director of the California Thoroughbred Horsemen's Foundation, which was a charitable trust serving the healthcare needs of the industry's largest immigrant workforce. And that's not the horses, which I thought, gee, that sounds funny, but it's the workers who come in and work in the work with all of the horses. So he has quite an experience in administration, nonprofit administration, plus he was in higher education administration in student services and leadership for over 15 years. So we're really lucky to have Kevin as head of the National Secular Student Association. The topic of his presentation is Next Generation of the Secular Movement, Are You Ready? And let me remind you that, that to put questions in the chat, and I will ask Kevin the questions at the end of the session, and he'll be able to answer them. So if you think of questions, please let us know. Okay, Kevin, take it away.
Well, great. It's great being with everyone today, and thank you very much, Nancy. I have a presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that everyone should be able to see that. So good. So just welcome and thank you for joining us today. This presentation goes a little fast, so it's a little fun and there's a lot going on. So at the end, we have time for questions at the end. So, no, it's not. There we go. So a little bit today, we're going to be talking about the mindset of the next generation. So we're looking at millennials, but particularly we're looking at Generation Z. We'll look at the changing world on the college campus, how to engage the next generation, or just for a lot of local groups, new and younger members. And then things, some practical things that you can do, and then again, answering any of your specific questions. And so there's almost any part of this that I can elaborate more in, but really I think having your questions are what's going to help the most in getting the information that you want. So we'll leave definitely some time for that. So Secular Student Alliance, we are part of the larger secular community, and we work with a lot of the organizations. But we're the only national organization dedicated to working with atheist, humanist, and non-theist students. So we're looking at working with the future leaders in the secular movement, but also the future leaders who will have secular values in our communities. And so we do a lot of leadership development and a lot of clearly focus on secular issues and secular values. So we started in 2000 with a group of students in Ohio, and now we're over 300 members almost in every state across the nation. So this map is from last year. This current year with COVID is a little bit different, but I think everyone understands that. So the Secular Student Alliance, as we're saying, we're part of the larger secular movement. We do a lot and have a great relationship with Camp Quest, who does the summer camps, and I think Colorado has their own Camp Quest program, and they're actually in the process of starting day camps and after-school programs and those sorts of things. But we also work with all of the major organizations, and we're one of the members of the Secular Coalition for America. So one of the other things that while working with the national organizations, we also try to do a lot of work with the local organizations and connecting our student organizations, our student chapters, with local organizations so that there can be mentoring opportunities and working together, and just making sure that our students are aware of the larger secular community in their own, the secular organizations in their own community. So for the Secular Student Alliance, what we look at is it wasn't that long ago that 1 in 5 in the US identified as non-religious, and now we're looking at the general population, about 1 in 4. For students, however, from PRIs, about 1 in 3 of students identify as non-religious. And there was actually a new survey that came out about a week ago that looked at about 47% of today's students are identifying as non-religious. So almost 1 in 2. So we can clearly see how fast things are changing within the U.S. And we're of a belief that uh, sort of the way the current administration is handling the epidemic and looking at issues of science and those sorts of things, we actually think we're going to see an increase in that. So I just shared this as a fun little thing. While most of our chapters are in colleges, we do have high schools, and we've seen a good growth in that last year. But this is Bailey. She's done some speaking at some of the national conferences, and she was starting our first middle school chapter in Utah. So fantastic young woman. It doesn't help that she's just adorable as well, but just if you've ever had a chance to meet her, she's super nice. So I think she's writing her third book now. So she's good. But we're here to talk about the next generation, so the upcoming generation, but specifically for the secular movement. First, though, we want to start looking at the class of 2024. So that's the incoming first-year students into school this year. Beloit College does what they call the mindset. So it's things that have happened in our society, events, that help form the mindset of the current generation. And so they publish a list every year. And so I've sort of begged, borrowed, and stolen from them, which is what I do for this presentation for part of it. But for them, so for their grandparents would often tell the story about the assassination of Kennedy. Their parents told them about their memories of when 9/11 happened. So the entire time that they have been born, the U.S. has been at war. So there's always been an American Taliban. They grew up with the Patriot Act in force, and each year sort of that increasing state surveillance against terrorism. Donald Trump has always been a political figure, first as a Democrat, then as an independent, and of course now as a Republican. Bill has always been Hillary's aging husband. Every 4 years, starts the questions about what will be the future of the electoral college. There has never been an Enron. Chernobyl has not produced any power while they've been alive. Cloning has been a typical medical procedure. So vaccines have always been erroneous linked to autism. The birth control pill has always been around. And they have lived under the mantra of see something, say something. So Sandy Hook was their Columbine. And for most students, and a majority of the students will tell you that they actually worry about their school being involved in an active shooter situation. So they are sort of that generation who has grown up with that and is sort of a daily reality of their lives. On a little bit lighter side, so Starbucks has been serving cafe lattes in China's Forbidden City ever since they've been born. Many of us probably had Encyclopedia Britannicas in our home. They have not, so they just go to the Wikipedia on the web and get free encyclopedia. And of course, the vast amount of knowledge that's available to them on the internet, they have all of that at their fingertips. So Survivor has been, was around ever since they've been born. Snowboarding has always been an Olympic sport to them. Quarterback Troy Aikman has always been calling the plays from the press room. And flyovers and God Bless America has always been a part of our sporting events, televised sporting events. Ketchup has always come in green. We've always had pink slime. So they will argue endlessly with their parents about what's the first episode of Star Wars. They have probably never heard the dial-up of America Online. They have lived in a floppy-less, no floppies world. However, the Mars Odyssey has always been looking, for where water will be when we visit. They've always had the nanny cam and the ability to look in on situations, from your phone, at any point. They've been able to use their fingerprints as ID since they were born. eHarmony has always been using their algorithms to promote love. For them, the big four, Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, are sort of the equivalent of the big three auto companies. Thank you. I couldn't think of what that was. Uh, so they don't really care about email. It's all about texting, instant communication. Their most popular app is Snapchat, and the way that they communicate, great way to not have their parents involved in what they're doing. Their phones are primarily used for taking photos. They've always had smartphones since they've been alive. Interestingly enough, this is they're the first generation where they are as unjudgmental about sexual orientation as their parents were about smoking pot. And so in this generation, only about 2/3 of this generation identify as exclusively heterosexual. So the definition and the spectrum of sexuality is definitely increasing for this group. For this group, about half the generation, half of this generation is comprised of people of color. And these are actually pictures of our students. So you can see there's a wide diversity of our students who are involved with the Secular Student Alliance. So at the same time, by their sophomore year, this generation will comprise 1/4 of the US population. So, and for this generation, they have seen 2 African-American secretaries of state, a black president, Disney's first black princess, and of course, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. One of the interesting things that I think will come into play for the future for this generation, I think is, and for the United States in general, but is the coronavirus. And something specific for this generation is coronavirus is hitting while they're in college. So most of the things that we've been doing, for our past 20 years, we've had to change this year because of the coronavirus. We were talking a little bit earlier, about 70% of our students are completely virtual for college this year. And then it's, the vast majority of the rest of them, even if they're on campus, are still doing most of their classes virtually. There's no meetings on campuses for the large part. There's no information tables. They're not able to have events on campus. So for them, this semester and this academic year will still be very much all virtual. So in talking about the generation, so I think we look at the baby boomers, and then the millennials is really generation X, Y, and Z. And I always say we have generation Z, we're out of the alphabet, we have no more generations after this. Just kidding. So who are the millennials? So for a large part, the millennials were born after 1980. Gen Z and Y, the ones we're looking sort of at now, were born after 2000. So right now there's about, it's the largest generation, 80 million in the United States, 2.5 billion worldwide. And clearly I think they grew up with technology as part of their everyday life. And why they matter. So by this year, they will be, the millennials in general, will be 50% of the workforce. And by 2030, just another 10 years, going to be 75% of the workforce. So they're going to have a huge impact on our society. So one of the things about this generation is they are technoholics. So they're typically they have about 5 different screens. And it's really integrated into their life. This is how they seek information. It's how they communicate. And they're very much, I think, when we started with Facebook and online social media, things lasted forever. And they understand, if you look at Snapchat and those sorts of platforms they're using, it's up there and then it's gone. So it's temporary, and things are much more private. So they have very much understand that environment. But it's also real time. They can live chat with anyone, anywhere in the world, instantaneously. And information, if they want some information, all of that is at their fingertips. And that's how they've grown up, and that's what they're very much used to. And they're highly creative with this. So, and they're also collaborative. And again, it's that real-time interaction with anyone, anywhere in the world, instantaneously. So looking a little bit more specifically, so that's sort of the entire generation. What we really want to look at is sort of the Secular Student Alliance, and who we work with are sort of what we look at the atheists and the non-religious. So we did a survey and asked some of our students how they identify. And so this gives you a little bit snapshot about our students. So how did they identify now? So clearly the largest, single category is atheist, but you can see the others are all up there fairly well. Also, another thing you'll notice is this adds up to way more than 100%. So we allowed people to select an individual, but the largest group of our students selected 3 or 4 identifiers of how they identify within the movement. And so I think that's for local groups, and even for national organizations, the words that you use to describe your organization either will invite or disinvite people. And we use the word secular as the most inclusive term possible. Because we're looking at people who may, and we have religious students who are involved in our organization, but they may support the separation of church and state. So we've shared this information with a lot of the national organizations and say, this is just something to think about. More and more students, we look at how they identify, are dealing less and less with labels, whether that's with their non-belief or in the example of LGBT issues about gay and lesbian, that those are also opening up, and less with labels and more just with how they identify and those sorts of things. So we sort of looked at, are we, how, if that's how you identify now, where did you come from? So we were worried that we were just, making home for people who are already secular, and you can see that's clearly not the case. So non-religious or secular household is at the top, but the vast majority of people came from a Christian household. And if you look all the way down at the bottom, that other specific, the largest part of that is Mormon. So didn't identify themselves as Christian, but as Mormon specifically. So in the Christian realm, clearly most people who come within the Secular Student Alliance came from a religious background. So talking about politics, I know no one is familiar with that, with the election just around the corner. One of the things we look at is, about 50% of atheists identify as liberal, and these are some stats from PRRI. 74% believe that the government should be helping the poor. So there's a very much of our job here and our values as humanists in the case is really to make sure that we are helping other people and ending suffering. And for a large part, we know that our students support and believe that. Almost 90% think abortion should be legal. Almost 95% think we should accept homosexuality and the broadening sphere of sexuality just in general. Almost 80% think we have strict laws protecting the environment. I think if anything you've seen on TV now, the youth are really driving the issues about climate change and protecting the environment. And I sort of love this one. About 83% say the difference between right or wrong depends on the situation. So there isn't this supreme being or from on high telling them what to do. It's really much more now we are develop our own values and morals and how we relate with people. And you can see also then sort of what's important to them in sort of general terms and those sorts of things. It's about politics again. Slightly more liberal group. About 20 years ago, about 1 in 10 of Democratic voters were identified as religiously unaffiliated. Right now, that's about 1 in 3. So there's been again a large change in that. And unaffiliated Democrats actually are a larger percentage than white Protestants. So 33% to 18%. So when the Secular America votes and the secular organizations sort of pushing a voter secular bloc and being involved in other things, we make up a huge part of that in the Democratic Party. For those of you with the Republican persuasion, about 15% currently of the Republican Party identify as unaffiliated. So smaller, but still a growing percentage of people. So for our students, how do they identify? And again, this is a survey we asked our students, so it's not scientifically, wouldn't stand up. However, we're going to get just a snapshot of what that is. But again, the vast majority of our students identify as liberal, and we clearly see that in how they sort of live out their daily lives and what's important to them. So now a little bit about the changing world on campus and sort of what we are seeing. And again, this is a little bit different, not sort of this year being the typical one, but just taking a look at just the general of what we find. So college campuses are home to many faith-based organizations. So we know that some campuses will have as many as 120 religious organizations and only one secular student alliance. So we sort of are the markets. Not we'd love for there to be more, and we'd love for there to be as many chapters on as many campuses as we can have. But really, we are that only home, and we work a lot with higher education and talking about we go to their conferences and we do webinars with them, and a part of our message to them is 1 of 3 of your students are religiously unaffiliated, and they're surprised by that. So USC, the University of Southern California here in Los Angeles area, their own internal studies say over 50% of their students are unaffiliated. And so they're very aware of those. They do a snapshot to find out that information. And their religious life office actually has a humanist chaplain and does a lot of humanist programming. But yeah, so we're sort of that minority on campus, and we really make sure that students understand and student affairs professionals on college campuses understand that they are also there to help with students' moral and value development. So a few years ago, 12 of the largest campus ministries sort of got together because they realized a trend. And so they realized 70% of first-year students coming to campus were leaving their faith. And they in the article, they really didn't describe what leaving the faith meant. I assume that is they stopped participating in organized activities, stop coming to church or stop coming to meetings and those sorts of things. So 70% in the first year stop coming and leaving the faith. So that was obviously a big concern for theirs. So they got together and they created Campus Ministry Link. So, and the purpose is a nationwide effort to rejuvenate God's presence on college campuses. And so they spent several millions of dollars, and what they started doing was identifying students in high school, finding out where they were going to college, and before they left, before they started college, they started sending them information about the religious services and religious groups on campus and around the campus. And then when students arrived on campus, and this isn't the day when classes started, this is actually when they first got to campus, they had someone meet them within 72 hours and to take them to whatever their faith was. So whether it was the student organization meeting or the off-campus facilities or a welcome event and those sorts of things. So investing a tremendous amount of activities or resources into making sure students stay religious. So the numbers are still in our favor, but the millions and millions of dollars that were instantly available because they understand we have to support and invest in our future of future Christians, and they understand the important age of college and making those lifelong decisions. So I won't go into a lot of detail. If you're with members with AHA or with American Atheist or FFRF, you're probably very familiar with Project Blitz. And so a lot of the interests in God We Trust posters in schools and those sorts of things. So a lot of our chapters are involved with that and sort of directly with that and working with those sorts of things, and the entirety of the plan and sort of how it's continuing to roll out. We will probably be involved in a lawsuit soon about religious groups suing schools to be allowed to discriminate against non-religious people and especially LGBT people and receive public funds from the university. So we continue to press that. We continue to work with the other organizations. Fortunately, we have multiple organizations who have lobbyists and lawyers and those sorts of things. Our students have testified at the national level. They have testified at their state houses as well. So our students continue to be involved, and we continue to help facilitate that and make that happen. So one thing about the religious groups, highly organized, actively proselytizing, and extremely well funded. So just to get a little bit more detail about our students. This is a picture from one of our conferences in Ohio. We have a summer conference every year. Nancy was great to put our conference this year was supposed to be actually in Washington, D.C., and we had worked with SCA. We're going to have a lobby day on Monday where our students went and lobbied with their elected officials on Capitol Hill. Clearly that didn't happen. We launched a virtual conference. And so Nancy did put the link up. Most of the videos are available on demand, so please be able to take advantage of that. We had some amazing speakers, so that's there for you as well. But really glad to be working with the students that we do. I give you some snapshots. Clearly, the things there, the separation of church and state, a very strong passion of theirs, and something that they're actively involved in, and a lot of their activism surrounds. And that really translates into, when we look at, clearly something else is the environment, making sure that we have evidence-based policies and moving forward to combat climate change. Black Lives Matter has been especially the past year, but has always been an issue with our students and something that they're passionate about. I would say almost all of our chapters did work and marched and helped organize in Black Lives Matter over this past year, this spring and summer. And clearly LGBT rights are something that our students are strongly passionate about. We know that about 20% of our students identify primarily as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, and another 5% as transgender and gender nonconforming. So I think a large shift in what's coming up within the secular movement. Women's reproductive health and the women's right, extremely important, as well as making sure their campuses are safe places for everybody. Voter registration has been a huge issue for our students this year, and something that they have been in the past, but are again extremely passionate about. This year, the Secular Student Alliance sort of led the project with a Secular America Votes, and looking to do voter registration. We started this pre-COVID, and so we were looking at doing in-person voter registration drives. We switched that over to virtual registration drives, and lately I've been doing a big get out the push. Some of the some of the initial data from people aged 18 to 24, I think it is that from 2016 to 2020, it's about a 10 times increase in the number of young people who have already voted. So registration for our group, for our students, is about 82% of our students we know are registered. But the number of students this year who are going out to vote looks like it's setting astronomical records compared to the past. So one, we're super excited about that. And we're glad that they're civically engaged and involved. The other thing is community service. This is our students on their own campuses. We encourage them to be involved in community service. This is a group every spring we do a secular spring break. So rather than going and partying, with this year, this is 2 years ago, we went to Puerto Rico and we're helping rebuild homes and community centers in Yabaco, which is where Hurricane Maria came ashore. So we were there a year and a half afterwards, and still blue tarps. This is part of our camp. So we're doing a lot of roof work and fixing roofs and those sorts of things. We worked with the group All Hands and Hearts. Amazing group. They're not specifically secular, but there are no religious components to their organizations. The Foundation Beyond Belief works with them on an ongoing basis, but fantastic. And so last year we went to the Bahamas, where Hurricane Dorian was coming on Great Abaco Island. We were right in the middle of that when COVID hit, and some of our students had 24 hours to get home. So we were busy helping coordinate travel plans to get our students back after that. So the question is, are you ready? That's what's up and coming. And I think when we talk with a lot of local groups, what is coming up through the Secular Student Alliance and through Camp Quest is often very different than current populations of local organizations that work with American Atheists, American Humanists, and FFRF. And so that's part of what we want to talk is, like, how do you make your organization a little bit more open and more available to new people? And that obviously includes students. So this is what we want to do, is we want to make connections. We want to, and the big part of that is about connecting with new people. And so it's sort of like, what do younger people want to be involved? So we start looking at millennials, and again, that's generation, X, Y, and Z. Millennials they grew up teaching themselves stuff, and a lot of that had to do with technology. Um, so one of the things we find out, they're not stuck in those rigid environments and of what organizations used to do the same thing for 50 years. They're very much and very quick to ask, well, why do we do it that way? And well, what if we did it different? And I think for organizations that have had a history like yours and who are active and have a set way of pattern, that sometimes can be frustrating, rightfully so. Um, but they're going to be asking that. It's not out of animus, or it's just the way they operate a little bit. And so understanding that, and when they start asking those questions, can be a great way to go, I get this, let's talk about this. So, and I think it's great. You have an intern, Michael, who's coming on board and who's, sounds a college student, sounds like he's younger, and as I start looking at, the ways you interact electronically and on social media, fantastic use of that person. So, coming in, why do you do that? Let's talk about that. So getting young people involved is a great way. When they start asking questions, what we always like to do, what we try when students contact us about starting a chapter, those sorts of things, is we don't say no. So if they say, well, I'd like to do this, and we know that that's not possible or that's not going to work on a campus because of our experience, we'll often say, that sounds great. Let's talk about some ways in which we can help you do that. And we present options for them. They get ownership, they feel involved, and then they get to say, oh, well, I have this skill, or I have this talent, or I like this, and you as an organization can find out what new people may be able to add to your organization. So again, we want people to, we want our members to go, when they graduate, to go on and become involved in their organizations, and we want to find new people who aren't aware, younger people who aren't aware of our organizations, especially for our local groups, our local groups across the country. So what can you do? So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about sort of welcoming, inclusive talk. There's a little bit more on that coming up. A big part is intergenerational and separate spaces. So there's a lot of things that's a lot of our local groups within the entire movement tend to be a tad bit older. So for American Atheists, I think their average group is over the age of 45. For FFRF and American Humanists, it's a little bit older than that. And so what we're really looking at is like, how can we make space for people, for people with families who are just having kids or who haven't had kids yet, to get involved in those sorts of things. By often having places where you can have sort of the general meeting and those sorts of things, but also have a place where people with kids can bring, if you have a facility, and I think there's the Humanist Hub, I think in the Boulder area, the Denver area, who have a space, so setting some of that aside, and they have a play area, so they can be having their meeting and also having someone watching kids as they play, and it's a little bit of babysitting, but also having some structured activities and those sorts of things. So having areas where you can do both of those at the same time, but also recognizing it's okay to have, this is for, we're doing some programming specifically for a younger group that everyone can participate in, but it's going to be focused for that. Specifically doing some things for college age students, but again, everyone can participate in that, or specifically doing things for your typical member, and that's okay. But again, everyone can be involved in that. So doing those different things, being clear and sort of, like, this is our target, helps people gauge the expectations. But again, and I think you said at the beginning, everyone is involved or invited to participate and be active in our organization. Constantly saying that is a wonderful way to sort of encourage that as well. So thinking about our programs, who they're marketed to, and making sure, one, we do some specific things for individual groups within that, but also making sure that we're creating spaces where people can be together, all together, or at the same time, and just with some different focuses. Well, I think you may get a little sense for some of the things that our students were involved in. They're very active. So community service projects, you mentioned earlier doing hiking and those sorts of things. Our students like active projects. I think one of the things they look at for Generation Y and Generation Z is they like experiences. So, I think you have a book club and those sorts of things, and why we definitely will have students who are interested in those sorts of things. They would rather be active experiences, going to a presentation and being involved with that. If they're working on, if it's, having a conversation about climate change and then doing something to help the environment. So there's that component to that. What we often find too is if you have new people coming into your organization for an event, if it's something where everyone comes in, you have your little, your quick announcements, and then it's a speaker, and then everyone goes home. There's not a lot of interaction. And so if no one goes up and talks to that person, or that person doesn't have a first welcoming impression, they may not come back. Well, if we're going and cleaning up, we're going on a hike, we're going up and cleaning up a river or part of the highway, you're doing something that's really sort of easy to have casual conversations with people that allow you to get to know them better and them to get to know you. Because again, it's a two-way street. When we connect, you want people who match you and they want to make sure that you match them. So doing those active things allows for a little bit, sometimes, more natural conversation. But one of the things that we also find out is you typically will have the groups who do there was one group who, every Wednesday at noon went to the same restaurant and had their reserved table, and everyone sat in the same seats, and everyone ordered the same thing, and they knew which is great. It's a wonderful program to have. It builds community and people are involved, and you've got your little cohort, which is fantastic. For new people coming in, that's always not a comfortable thing, because if you sit in someone else's seat, or if people are talking within their groups and not talking to you, you feel a little isolated. So just being aware of those sorts of things is also sort of important. And I'll also talk a little bit about benefits of what makes your group special. We all have it, and I think one of the things that we don't do a good job of is telling what that is. And I think your Humanists for Humanity projects, it's HHH. I know it's the HHH is the one for the email. But that's a great sort of thing, and being able to exemplify that and being able to share that. And again, some of the things we've talked about of what's going to draw newer people in, experiences and those things, that's sort of right up the alley of what newer people would be looking for and younger people would be looking for. With all of this, I said there's nothing wrong with liking what your group is doing right now and staying with that. So my assumption is you want to attract new people, and you want your organization to be, to open to new people. And one of the things that I constantly preach, if you don't want to change anything, which is again completely fine, but if you don't want to change anything, you don't want new people, because what you're doing meets your group, which is fantastic. So there's always a balance in that, and working on those sorts of things. But again, to attract new people, you often have to change something, which can be uncomfortable for some people, which makes sense. But that's often what has to happen if you're going to start inviting new people. So some simple things that you can do. One is and you guys sound like already websites and on social media. Vast majority of people, especially for students, the first thing they're going to do is do a Google search. There's a reason why Google has about 90% of the searches. It's super easy, and they can find the information. So making sure they're out there, making sure that the information that you're publishing is sort of active and showing what you're doing is super important. And I'll talk a little bit about more social media in just a little bit. Advanced planning and promotion is important. And some of the key things that we look at is when you're having events and you're having meetings and those sorts of things, is one, if you're open to having families, making sure you're saying that, but also then saying, if you're going to do something where kids have, someone will be watching kids, making sure you say that, because new people to your group, they're not familiar with you. They've got to know is there parking available there? How do I get there? Sometimes transportation is an issue for students. Clearly, oftentimes for people who have families, that's going to be less of an issue. But then they have, what do I do with my kids? Do I need to find a sitter? Can I take them there? Being able to, one, to plan that in advance and say that in your promotion is going to help new people know what the situation is and set their expectations to be able to better have a successful transition into your group. So again, parking, transportation, childcare is super, super important. The other thing is, again, we sort of I touched on this a little bit, is just encouraging participation and listening to new ideas. they're gonna, you're doing things and they're gonna ask why. And again, that's not a statement on you. That's them. Oftentimes, especially for the new generation, why do you do that? The best thing to be able to do is turn that around and go, great. How can you help us with that? So is it a new website? Is it reaching out to younger people? Is it working on childcare issues? And how do we make that easier for people? And what's the language we need to get out there to let people know that? Let those people help you. It's one of the great uses. Their ownership within the group, they become part of your group. They get to know you better. They know you're concerned. So that's a great way to sort of open that door. Easy things to do, but oftentimes asking what that is and allowing them to do it. Giving people, I think some of your interns sounds like it's going to have taking over your social media and making that feel younger, because they will be posting things that are interesting to them, and you'll be, connecting with newer people. A little bit on welcoming inclusive talk. Emily from AHA I stole this from her. I always try to give her credit. I thought it was a great. So she pulled a little bit, some of the things I have heard, and these are some things that she has heard from local AHA groups. So oftentimes, you may hear when new people come in, the question is, oh, how old are you? And for oftentimes that may people, maybe a little not comfortable for people. So great way to sort of open that door is, oh, what do you think of the events? So getting some information, knowing about them. Oh, are you new here? That question that turns like you sort of know that they're not, or you're not, so I don't think we've met. My name is. Again, start that communication, start that introduction, get them involved, and they're going to, share that back, and they get to choose what's comfortable as well. Do you have kids? Get a little bit, into privacy and those sorts of things. Someone we often find with our students, they're going to be a little bit more private in the beginning until they get to know you. So what brought you here today? You'll find out, again, what's important to them, what they thought they were interested in. So if they say something, you go, oh my gosh, we have that program. We didn't talk about it today, but let me introduce you to the person who coordinates that. And, again, you get them involved in ownership within the group. Are you in school? Again, it sort of singles them out a little bit, especially for students, and there's something different going on. Hey, glad you're here. Tell me about yourself. Again, they get to choose what that is, and also they're going to tell you things that they think of why they're there and those sorts of things. I've heard this one time. Oh my gosh, people come up. We need more young people, and that's it's a little, it's a little off-putting to people. And the great thing is, great to meet you. So, we often go, have you met our other young person? So right away, you're telling them we don't have a lot of you. And again, that's not a comfort zone. So, let me introduce you to my friend. And again, it's familial. It's like, hey, we're a group here. We're a family. And oftentimes we find our students, and again, we know a lot of them are coming from largely Christian backgrounds. And we know that a lot of our students are not open to their family. We had a student who was actually in Kentucky who was looking at starting a chapter and participated in our Ask an Atheist program. He made one post on social media. His parents found out about it, and this happened last month. His parents found out about it. They're Christian, and they cut off all funding. So they've already paid for school this year or this semester, so that's taken care of. But he's like, they pay my rent. So he has to actually go out and get another job to help pay rent so he continues schooling. So we definitely find that happens. And so our students' privacy is still a big issue to them, where they are in life and being financially independent and those sorts of things. And so that's for a lot of young people. They're going to be testing those waters. Your group, being great role models as you are, clearly you're going to open that up and make them much more comfortable. The big part is when they're giving them a great first experience and introduction into your group. Social media, huge, clearly going to be huge for younger people, finding out information. One of the things that we find out with local groups is they love Meetup. Meetup is a great tool, but in Southern California was actually having a leadership transition with all their local groups, and they invited all the SSA chapters to participate. So that, so I think they had like 32 different groups from all of Southern California for like a 2-day retreat. So they were talking about ways in which they communicate. And when they goes, oh, our Meetup page, our Meetup page, our Meetup page, our Meetup page, our Meetup page. And the student pulled someone aside and goes, what is Meetup? That is not one of the things they're on. It's also not a great way. I'm not saying get rid of it. If it works for your current members, fantastic, keep using it. But it really doesn't have a good way to show you interactivity and for people to get involved in those sorts of things. So there are other platforms that can really do a much better job of showing what you're doing, soliciting inputs, being able to interact with people, and showing people that you're active. So again, the big three: Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Not saying you have to be on all three. They have different purposes. But if you're going to do one, I say it's Facebook. Are there still lots of young people on Facebook? Yes. And I think if you're looking for those family-aged individuals, that's definitely a place. As we get a little bit younger, it's more Instagram and Snapchat, which are harder to enter. But again, great way to show you were doing pictures, polls, events, discussions. You can interact right with them on the site. Other members can interact. It's just a great way to do it. Some easy rules with that is only about 30% of what you post is specifically about your organization's what you're doing. The other 70% is like, this is stuff that's important to our group. So whatever that is, if it's, if you're looking at, sort of the humanitarianism and looking at ways you can, positive impact and disaster relief, lots of information about that, and using that humanist voice and why that's important to you, people get to read that and go, this is interesting. I'm going to follow this group. Then they start to see stuff, the commercial about, oh, here's our next meeting or those sorts of things. So a big part of that is here's stuff that interests us and what we're doing. And again, that comes from your voice. But an easy thing, following us on social media, sharing what we're doing. Ours tends to be from a younger point of view because that's our market. So sharing some of the information that we're doing is a great way to do that. You can very easily within Facebook and Instagram do paid promoted posts. So for $20, you can do something for a week long and usually get some pretty good results. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy. There's a couple presentations out there for American Humanists and I think Ethical Union where I did sort of a background of ours and how we do promoted posts and those sort of things. But you can use your social media to benefit that and target your local area as well. Instagram, of the three, it's where the young people are right now. Photos, images, those are things. Almost all of our chapters have an Instagram account, and that's how we keep a lot of tabs on what they're doing day to day. Then you can also advertise on Instagram through Facebook. So great, since they own it, easy to do. And I think everyone's familiar with Twitter. We don't find it the best linkage from you post something to getting someone to come to your event, but great for sharing your voice and those sorts of things. Sharing what other groups are doing, super easy to do. That sort of stuff. I often think there's a lot of good that religion does as far as building community. And they clearly are interested in their young people and throwing millions and millions of dollars, as we sort of talked about, to make sure that young people stay engaged. This is from their one of their internal surveys looking at 18 to 13-year-olds, and this is from a few years ago. But I think some of the interesting things, they looked at positive and negative aspects of church. And so, church is where you find answers to the meaning of, for meaningful life. And again, values and morals. So they're also going to look at it as Jesus prescribed ones. However, it's morals and values, which we all have, and humanism is a great vehicle for that. The relevance for my life, again, humanism speaks tremendously to that. Church allows them to sort of be themselves. We start to go down a little bit here when church is tolerant of different beliefs. And you'll see we sort of get into a bigger trend where the church, then this is now is turned negative of how teens feel about church. Church rejects what science is telling me about the world. And we especially see it from our students. Evidence-based science, and in general, one of the things we find is young people are much quicker to find out fake news or fake reporting or those sorts of things on social media than the rest of the generations are. So their BS indicator is way higher. So they're not happy about that. So the other thing is we look at, and I think, some of the things, church is hypocritical. They don't like that. Church is not a safe place to express doubts. And clearly, I think we offer a great avenue into that. And church seems shallow. And I think the whole point of humanism and living out your values is adding, worth to what you do and making sure that we're protecting other people. And so there's many things. And when you look at selling to new people, and especially younger people, and even to people who are having some of their doubts about religion, These are some great points, things you're already doing and probably excelling at. These are things that a lot of young people are desperate for and not getting from religion. Let's take advantage of those. So we can use their information. Thank you for paying for that survey. Let's use that for our benefit as well, and things that you can do to take advantage of that. Because again, you are excelling at some of these things. The reality is that it's all about relationships. I always say, who from your group is the most appropriate person to go and meet new people? And I would say every group has at least, that grumpy old guy, who's always, dogging religion and, is always the bah humbug. I somewhat jest there, but, most groups have that one person. So and I always joke and say, if you don't know who that one person is, it may be you. But that's probably not your best person. So who is your people that go out there and is, welcoming and those things? And that's the person, like, you're on new people duty. Make them feel welcome. You want to designate someone to do that. So just in short recap, how are you going to outreach to sort of new people? Who's going to be doing it? And then what are you going to do to make them feel welcome? By your group having sort of intentional conversation about that, you jump way ahead of other groups who aren't even thinking about this. And so again, it requires change, and it requires, slightly different what you're doing to different, but that doesn't mean you abandon what you're currently doing, and you don't abandon what's currently working for your members. You want to keep that up. This is about adding to and sort of increasing your offerings and your value and those sorts of things. So I know I've been talking for a little bit. Again, happy to go into any detail on that. I'm going to unshare my screen and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, that was fascinating.
Well, thank you.
Really very interesting. And we do have some questions. Some are really specific and some general. One of the specific ones is that early in your presentation, you looked at how people identify themselves, agnostic, atheist, humanist, freethinker, secular, non-religious, and other. And there were two questions about that. One of them was, what's in the other? And the other was, how are these really distinguished from each other? I mean, other than agnostic, I would say yes to all of those. So what's the distinction between them? We
intentionally didn't do a definition because we were looking at what labels students are putting on themselves and how they're identifying. So yes, there are going to be some definitional differences based on people, but really we were looking at the terms that they're using. So the other was, again, we intentionally left a field for, we may not have something in this list and that you call yourself, it may be spiritual, or it may be they're Wiccan, or whatever, or again, none of these really line up for me. And one of our students goes, I just believe in love. Like that was one of our scholarships, is I just believe in love. Okay. So it's going to be different, but we wanted to look at it from this perspective of how are they identifying and what terminology are they using. We could get into a whole nother thing of how they define that and those are things. So yeah, but I think the big point of that is they're typically using 3 or 4 identifiers within it to help move that along, not just one. So, and we've, like, American atheists are like, American atheist. We're like, you're going to lose some people because they're not identifying just with that one term.
Okay, that's interesting. You also had on your map, you had 3 stars in Colorado. What were those 3 stars?
That is, Colorado, that's Boulder, Fort Collins, and there's the one in Aurora, CU. So, and this year is we've sort of leaving our map up for this current year and recognizing that it's going to take us a little time with all of our students sort of in transition this COVID year. But yeah, so those are the 3 chapters. And we know that many of our students, we have new students who are joining and want to start chapters, but right now, many schools are not even starting new organizations.
Do you have contacts at those? If we wanted to know how the most successful way to reach out to Colorado School of Mines, they could give us some. I think part of our problem is that we don't know what the first step is. I mean, all of those things you gave were really great, but it sort of felt like, how do you get their attention at the very beginning so that you can share stuff with them?
Exactly. And one of the things we often say is the easiest thing to do is contact us. We'll help. We'll make an introduction. This year, again, is going to be a little weird. I think that sort of makes sense with the way things are happening with COVID, because many of our students aren't on campus, so they may not. They may be going to a Colorado school, but not even in Colorado, or
No.
they may be somewhere else in the state and not near you. Um, so this year's gonna be a little different, but contact us. Will you like, hey, we've got these coming programs up. What would be the great way to invite someone who would we can set up an introduction to, to help facilitate that introduction, those things. Because oftentimes we'll see people go like, hey, I've been trying to reach you and no one's answering. And I was like, and I can tell you right now, the students aren't going to, because they're like, who is this person? So
Yes.
we'll help with that.
Okay.
So one of the things that we've been doing is we've had local groups have been sponsoring scholarships as part of our program. So as part of that, the local group selects the recipient of the scholarship. And then at the end of the process, we give you all of the contact information of every student in your state, whether they're going to school in your state or where they live in your state, so that you can contact them. Because again, we want to facilitate that relationship.
We have a question. How many members are in SSA, and does the COVID time, well, you've sort of already addressed how SSA is getting along, is that the students aren't in college and it's tough. But how many members do you have?
We have two of our chapters. We have chapters and affiliates. So chapters, it's two different internal statuses, which for you guys doesn't mean anything. For us, it does, because one, they give us their roster, so we know who their current membership is. For affiliates, they don't. They don't give us our roster, so all we know is the leadership. So of what we knew from last year, we were about 5,000 members, and that's the ones that were giving us information of who their members were. So who were giving their rosters. So it's probably close to 50% of the students, the chapters that don't. But a small chapter, when just starting, can have 5 members, and that may be their first year. So we're often finding once we do some publicity in the background, they quickly jump to 25 and they can grow from there. But one of our chapters in Utah alone has 150 members. And clearly, wow, COVID's very different right now.
Well, another question is, does SSA solicit prospective students who are non-religious as the church group do?
We the students, we look at our chapters being student initiated, so they're the ones starting it. It's the best path for success, and we're in Los Angeles, they're on their campus, and oftentimes to use campus facilities you have to be a student organization to be able to do that. So it's the model that works best for us. The students start it, we provide them lots of free resources, tabling supplies, publicity, leadership development, all sorts of stuff. And that comes from our donors and supporters allow us to be able to do that. Everything that we provide them is free. We also do grants for programs. We have speakers who will go and speak on their campus and those sorts of things. But they're the ones doing that on their campuses. For new members, we do pay promotion for just general advertising out there in the ether webs about we exist. We often, every day we have students saying, well, either one, I want to be a member, and they're not on a chapter, they're not on a school that has a chapter, or they're saying, I want to start a new chapter. I'm totally interested in this. And our campus activities staff works with them to be able to do that. So in a normal year, we're pretty successful. Typically, we've got them in we contact them within 24 hours. Again, this is when when the iron's hot, when their passion is going. And typically within a month, we can have they start it. But we can assist them in starting a chapter, usually within a month from them first contacting us.
Many of my adult friends I know are humanists, but would never go to a group meeting. And there's so many of the students in your data, there's so many students who are non-believers. Do you have any advice, like how do you get them to even, they look at a group even like us as a church because we're organized and we have organized activities and discussion groups. So I guess I'm asking, are these religious affiliate groups who are reaching out to students so successful because it's just a different kind of student, or you find that they really are willing to join a group?
I think joining groups in general. So, and I know there's often, atheists are like herding cats and they don't want to join anything. And I mean, we don't find that. You have members, we have members, people join. you know, FFRF has 33,000 members, I think they just said, or 38,000 members. So people are joining. But it's why people join. And for a large part, religious groups and groups like ours is they want community. What we always say is they want to find friends who are like-minded. They want to build secular community. So oftentimes it's a safe place besides the family. And then for us, we sort of push that lifelong activism. So again, knowing what you stand for and being organized helps, because you know what those expectations are. So the loosey-goosey feeling I always say of when you go to for your first time going to a group and you're like, they don't seem very organized, or they weren't sure what was going on, or that's not comfortable, and probably they're not coming back. So being organized, having the programs that you do, having those different things, being able to ways to contact, here's the point person, you know, that all helps people get involved. And it's that whole aspect of community and the organization of it, which why a lot of religious groups excel and are good things for us to continue to use.
I think we have one more question, and we've gone over what we usually do, but you have been so fascinating a speaker that we've lost one person. It's really great. We thank you so much. The last question is, can you recommend a training video or other materials that we can share with members about being more welcoming, so that so those of us who might be a little shy and not quite sure what to do know how to do that?
There, from our past conference, there's a couple things that touch on that. But if you go to our YouTube page, there are multiple videos from multiple conferences, and they come from a very student base. But some of those are, how do you welcome new people? Excuse me. The other Emily Newton at AHA and Ethical Union, she really does a whole series, I think, on that, and I think AHA has several bits of information and videos on that as well. And Ethical Union also has videos also. So if you want, I can send an email out to them and go, hey, do you have some stuff on this, and see what comes back, and I'm happy to send it to you. But there's, yeah, I know we have tons of videos, and AHA I know has some, and Ethical Union I know has some.
We didn't plan this, and I know it's going to take a little longer, but you seem to have some students on, do you? Can you see some of your members? I'm wondering if any of them would, if they're there, would be interested in just saying a word about secular students and your participation and what your answer would be to some of the questions we asked. I don't know if there are any of them. If you don't have to, but if you're comfortable just kind of raising your hand or something, that would be, we'd be glad to welcome you. Not seeing anybody. So, all right. Well, I want to end by just a couple of things. First of all, our next program is going to be a really interesting one and very current. It's going to be on crime prevention in Jefferson County, and it's presented by the Crime Prevention Unit of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. And it's either going to be Deputy Mark Bybee or another deputy. They're not quite sure who will be available yet. And they're going to, these are the kind of topics they're going to cover. An overview of Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, who they report to and how they interact with local city and town law enforcement, all the news stories about police, how does Jefferson County train its officers, how can the public be better informed of their role in the community, how are conflicts resolved when they occur with citizens, what are the new formats for dealing with nonviolent crimes that are being suggested in other communities, and are these being considered in Jefferson County? So we had a presentation a couple of months ago about what's happening in Denver. So we thought, boy, maybe we should find out what's happening in our own county. So I encourage you to come. That is on November 22nd. It's early. There are 5 Sundays. So we are on September 22nd, the weekend before Thanksgiving. So I urge you, we'll be sending the publicity out about that next week. I urge you to sign up. It's going to be a great, great program. So I think that's it. Thank you very much. One last thing, if you haven't voted, go and vote. Send your vote in, take it to a drop-off spot. Please vote. All right.
Thank you, Kevin.
Oh, very much.
Thank you very
Kevin,
much.
thank you so much. That was a fascinating presentation.